Welcome to Classic Take, Season 2, Episode 39. The topic we will discuss today is Will Mashiach come on Shabbos? The time of Mashiach's arrival, as we've discussed in previous episode, really can be understood in one of two ways. There's a certain set time that Mashiach has to come, which nobody knows, as our sages say, that this is one of the secrets that are completely concealed. Maybe Prophet Daniel became privy of this information. Even it's questioned if he fully understood it, if he remembered it, or if he he really got it or not. But it's generally this is something which is a concealed secret, a guarded secret. And then there's the Achishena, there's the way Mashiach could come in a haste. We could hasten it up through our actions, and that could happen any day of the year. So it's really, obviously. There's no reason of there's no point in trying to figure out exactly when, what day, what month. Ultimately, it depends on us. Figuring it out won't help us anyway because we don't know this guarded secret of Hashem, and what's dependent upon us is not to figure out what to do. If we do, we could hasten it. It could happen any day. So the discussion I want to have is just it has a number of lessons, it's a little bit of a fascinating discussion as well, and discussing the idea of Mashiach coming on Shabbos. As I mentioned in the previous episode, we have the 13 principles of faith that were articulated by the Rambam. The 12th principle is a principle of the belief in the coming of Mashiach. And there is the Nusach of Ani Mamin. There is these 13 principles of faith that were articulated by the Rambam, were later, the Ani Mamin was not written by the Rambam himself, it was later written up by, I don't know exactly the name of the author, but this became pretty widespread. Many people recite it daily. A nusach, a certain set wording of every day people acknowledge these 13 principles of faith. And the 13th principle is that I believe with complete faith with the coming of Mashiach. Even though he may tarry, nevertheless I await his coming every day. So this is this articulated wording, I await this coming every day, is very significant because it technically means that any single day Mashiach could come. Now, a lot of commentaries have discussed this particular wording, in detail, at length, because seemingly it seems from the Talmud that there are limitations of when Mashiach can come. Why should there be limitations? How should that work? So let's discuss a little bit the background of this topic. There's a tractate, in Tractate Eruvin, Daf Mem Gimel Amud Aleph Amud Beis. Our sages discussed it. There's a prohibition on one of the there's 39 prohibited labors that one is not allowed to do on the day of Shabbos, and one of them is there's a prohibition of Eitzah, of transporting from one domain to another domain, but in a related aspect of that is also a prohibition to travel more than a certain distance outside the city limits. It's called Tchum Shabbos. Not allowed to travel. I mean, if you're living in a city where there's, certain places in the world you could walk for days and you're still within the city. But we're talking about whether a person lives in a small bungalow colony, a small village, or he's wherever it is, he's living in a city where there's a place where the city ends and now it's open field, it's forest, the highway, whatever it is. So then there's a certain limit, 2,000 amos, about 3,000 feet roughly, they're allowed to walk on Shabbos out of the city limits. Now, our sages discuss the whole thing that if Mashiach could come on Shabbos, why would there be a discussion if Mashiach could come on Shabbos? So the Talmud goes through a whole back and forth in its regular style of question and answer and so on and so forth. But the Talmud mentions a teaching about somebody taking an oath that he's going to be a Nazir, will have to refrain from wine and taking haircuts, that will take place, that he will accept this Nazirus, this oath on the day that Mashiach will come, the day that Ben David, the descendant of David, Mashiach will come. And the Talmud discusses, and the Talmud discusses when he's allowed to drink wine. It says he's allowed to drink wine on Shabbos and Yom Tov, but he's not allowed to drink wine during the days of the week. And the simple assumption is that the reason why he's allowed to drink wine on Shabbos and Yom Tov and Jewish holidays is because we have an assumption Mashiach won't be able to come at that day. And the question is, what is one thing, why not? And the Talmud says, the assumption that's given is that in order for Mashiach to come, he has to travel. And on Shabbos and Yom Tov, we're not allowed to travel more than a certain limit outside, a very small amount outside the city limits. Now, the only way the only way Mashiach or anybody could work their way around it is something called traveling l'mayla me'asara t'vachim, which basically means traveling higher than 10 tfachim, higher than 10 handbreadths from the ground, which, is technically there's, I don't want to get into the whole discussion about how that would affect various modes of travel. But practically what it would mean, the way it would be relevant for Mashiach would mean that he would have to miraculously be traveling through the ear with some supernatural capability. So the Talmud asks, is there a prohibition for travel? We know you're not allowed to go beyond the city limits. Is there a prohibition if somebody is doing that traveling beyond the city limits if he's traveling l'mayla me'asara t'vachim, if he's traveling in the ear above 10 handbreadths of the ground? And the Talmud goes through a whole thing. It remains unresolved. But the Talmud says that if we were to say that you're allowed to travel beyond 10 handbreadths, you're allowed to travel in mid-ear, so then Mashiach will be able to come on Shabbos, because Mashiach will have a way of overcoming this prohibition of not being able to travel, because he could travel in the air. But if the prohibition of traveling beyond the city limits applies, even if somebody is miraculously floating through the air, so then Mashiach won't be able to come on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Now, the question is, and then the Talmud goes through the whole discussion. The Talmud says another reason why Mashiach can't come on Shabbos, because in order for Mashiach to come, Eliyahu of Elijah the prophet has to come the day before. And we know that Eliyahu of Elijah the prophet won't come on Friday, because if he would come on Friday, he would be disturbing the Jewish people who are going to come to greet him from preparing for Shabbos. So we have a tradition that he won't come on the eve of Shabbos on Friday or the eve of Yom Tov. So therefore, Mashiach will not come on Shabbos and Yom Tov, because he cannot come without Eliyahu Navi coming the day before him. And Eliyahu Navi, Elijah the prophet, cannot come on the eve of Friday and on the eve of Shabbos, which is Friday, and the eve of Yom Tov. Now, this whole discussion requires a lot of analysis and understanding. But the very basic question is that Eliyahu of Elijah the prophet, we know that he's, according to Jewish tradition, he's more like an angel-like being who, he went up to heaven alive, and he's able to float through the world. He's able to travel like an angel speedily from place to place. But what is this discussion about Mashiach, being, out of city limits and he has to travel? So there's various different approaches, various different understandings. One understanding, which I'm going to mention now, which is one of a number of understandings, is that Mashiach will gather in order when Mashiach comes. What does it mean the day that Mashiach comes? It means the day that Mashiach's coming becomes world news. It hits the front pages of the newspapers. Everybody hears about him. In order for that to happen, Mashiach has to gather in the exiles, or at least the Jewish people have to be aware of him. So in order for that to happen, Mashiach has to gather in the Jewish people, or at least gather in the elders, the leaders of the Jewish people, and notify them that he arrived. Now, in order to do that, on a weekday, Mashiach could, call them up and tell them to travel to a certain place to meet him. But on Shabbos, the only place they would be able to come to meet him is if they would travel miraculously. This would be a miraculous thing, as we know the coming of Mashiach, particularly from the perspective of the Talmud, is taken for granted as being accompanied with many miracles. So they would have to travel miraculously in the air, as we say, with the clouds of heaven. So in order for Mashiach to come, meaning that Mashiach to become publicized, travel will have to be traveled. Either the Jewish people as a whole will have to travel to Israel, or at least the elders will have to gather to one place. Mashiach will tell them that he arrived. And that is a problem to do on Shabbos, because you can't travel, and you can't walk beyond the city limits. And the only way to do it, the only way to work around it, is if you're able to fly through the air miraculously, and we don't know if even that will be permitted or not. There's another understanding is that Mashiach is an outside of Israel, maybe, or Mashiach himself is traveling to the Jewish people to tell them that he arrived. There's various different understandings of what this mode of travel is all about. But either way, I don't want to, it's a whole Talmudic discussion, a full-on discussion with the commentaries, and it's really a fascinating discussion, but beyond the point I want to discuss now. So when after everything is said and done, what emerges from the Gemara is there could be two problems with Mashiach coming on Shabbos. One is that we don't know; it remains an unresolved doubt if there's a prohibition of traveling beyond the city limits in midair, if that's prohibited or not. So therefore, based on the understanding that Mashiach's coming will necessitate his traveling and the traveling of the Jewish people, so on Shabbos he will not be able to come. Another problem that is associated with the arrival of Mashiach on Shabbos is that Elijah the prophet, Eliyahu Hanavi, cannot come the day before. Now, the Rambam, very important, I want to highlight this because a lot of people, they walk away from the Talmud saying that it seems outright that Mashiach cannot come on Shabbos and Yom Tov because the Talmud says, emerges from the Talmud that since Eliyahu Hanavi didn't come the day before, he cannot come on Friday, Mashiach cannot come on Shabbos. The Rambam in Hilchos Naziros Perek Dal Halacha Yud Aleph, the Rambam, when he discusses this law, he says that there's a doubt whether Mashiach will come on Shabbos and Yom Tov. And without getting into the whole Talmudic discussion, which the commentaries mention, it emerges from the Rambam that the Rambam is not concerned about the issue of Mashiach arriving on Shabbos due to the fact that Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, couldn't come on Friday. It seems that the Rambam did not feel that the coming of Mashiach is dependent on the arrival of Eliyahu Hanavi. Rather, there's another reason. The issue is just regarding Mashiach himself. Will he be allowed to travel, or will the Jewish people be allowed to travel to know that he came? So basically, the way the Rambam learns is that it's a suffix, it's a doubt. We do not know whether he's able to come on Shabbos, which seems to be, the Rambam seems to be referring to the doubt in the Talmud if you're allowed to travel, beyond the city limits. If you're not traveling, on the ground, you're traveling in the air, and he just leaves it as an unresolved doubt. And based on that, whatever, I'm not getting into the laws of somebody took the oath. Based on that, it would depend when he took the oath, and so on and so forth. Now, it emerges from the Rambam not that unequivocally Mashiach cannot come on Shabbos, but it's a doubt. And commentaries discuss how much of a doubt is this? Does it mean that Mashiach cannot come? It's an interesting discussion. Now, we do find, for example, there's a very famous Jewish custom that on the night, Saturday night, we sing Eliyahu Hanavi. We say different songs and hymns about Elijah the prophet. And one of the explanations of why we do it is that since Mashiach needs to, we can't have the coming of Mashiach without Elijah the prophet, and Elijah the prophet couldn't come on Friday, might not even have been able to come on Shabbos if there's a prohibition of travel. So then the first moment that Shabbos is over, we're already praying that now at least let Eliyahu Hanavi arrive and tell us that Mashiach is coming. So there are certain customs that were instituted based on this notion that, that's one of the reasons for this custom, there's other reasons as well, but at least this reason of the custom takes into account the fact that we are assuming that Eliyahu Hanavi or Mashiach cannot come on Shabbos. But as I mentioned, it remains a doubt. And as the Rebbe said, would often say that, Mashiach, even the Rebbe would be speaking many times on Shabbos, and the Rebbe would be saying that, Mashiach should come immediately. And even though the Gemara says it's a question, Mashiach could come on Shabbos, we have Eliyahu Hanavi will be able to answer the question. In other words, Hashem, there's definitely ways of that this doubt could be taken care of in a way that Mashiach can come. And either way, as a number of commentaries say, from the fact that we say in the Ani Mamin, which was accepted in many Jewish communities, that I await this coming every day, means that even on Shabbos, we await the possibility of Mashiach's arrival. I also want to point out that this is an interesting Talmudic discussion, which is based, so to say, on technicalities of Mashiach's arrival and how it fits in with Jewish law. Mashiach cannot violate Jewish law in order to come. So is he allowed to travel on Shabbos and so on and so forth? But I want to mention along the lines that I mentioned before that it really remains a doubt. What's actually interesting, maybe even fascinating, is that in more midrashic or Kabbalistic sources, it is explained a specific connection between the arrival of Mashiach and Shabbos. And there's a famous story about the Arizal, the famous Rabbi Luria the Arizal, who famous Kabbalist who lived in the city of Tzfas. On one Friday night, he had a custom. He would accept Shabbos. He would go out in the field to greet Shabbos, and he was together with his group of students. And he said, "You all want to go now to Jerusalem to greet the Shabbos in Jerusalem." With his wisdom and knowledge of Kabbalah, he could travel. He could, go to. They'll be in Yerushalayim. And some of them agreed right away, and other people said, "No, we need to ask our wives. We're just going to disappear for the night." And the Arizal became very upset. He said that this was a Eis Rasin, it was a time of grace above. At this time, if we would have all gone to Jerusalem, we could have brought about the redemption. And you guys missed it, basically. And there's a sefer, Emek HaMelech, there's a mystical text, Emek HaMelech, which is based on the teachings of the Arizal. And he writes over there, very interesting, he writes that in every generation we know there's a person who's the potential Mashiach for that generation. There's also a time, which maybe not so known, is that there's a unique time in each generation which is the most opportune for the coming of Mashiach. And he said that the Arizal was that time, he was the potential Mashiach of that generation. Mashiach ben Yosef, whatever exactly the definition he writes in the Emek HaMelech. And the opportune time for that generation was a special divine time of grace for that generation that Friday night. And the Arizal, so to say, his soul came down into the world, to teach us Kabbalah and everything, but ultimately was the ultimate hope was that they will be able to use out that opportune time to bring Mashiach. And the Arizal told the students that we lost it. But he says, Emek HaMelech says interesting thing. He says that Mashiach will come. What time was this? This was the time of accepting Shabbos. Now, it could have maybe been Friday before sunset even or not. But anyway, he said that at this time of the acceptance of Shabbos, Kabbalah Shabbos, that is the opportune time for the arrival of Mashiach. That is the time when, so to say, when the spirit of Mashiach, the energy of Mashiach becomes manifest, and that is a time that is opportune time when Mashiach will come. We also know there's in the Lechadoidi, in the prayers, the hymns that we say Lechadoidi, which was actually written up at Rabbi Sholom Zirkind. It's also one of the sages who lived in Tzfas at that time. We see there he speaks a lot about the yearning for the coming of Mashiach. And if you look at in the words in the translation of he's praying and he's hoping and he's yearning very strongly, very eloquently for the coming of Mashiach. And it's not just that we're at that time we're speaking about Mashiach, but it's also the way he's explaining it is because at this time Shabbos in generally is a taste of the future. Shabbos is a day of rest, which is a taste of the future times of the 7th millennium, which will be a day of eternal rest. And this was the opportune time for redemption. So, and there's also another medrash, the very interesting medrash, which is brought down by a number of sources, that the future redemption will start on Shabbos. Again, whatever that means, as I spoke in the previous episode, the redemption is a process, but it mentions that some sources say it will start on Shabbos. That's why some people say that we add special prayers for the coming of Mashiach on Shabbos. Shibbolei Leket brings this down. There is another interesting tradition that right before Mashiach comes, the final 9 months will be extremely, difficult, and the last day it will be even worse than it was in all the 9 previous months. And that last day will be Shabbos, and Mincha time, towards the end of the day, towards the afternoon, that is when the Jewish people's prayers will be accepted and Mashiach will come. And what's interesting is that while academically, Talmudically, there's a doubt. And again, the Rambam makes it clear not that it cannot happen, it's a doubt, but there's other traditions which seem to actually support the notion that maybe the most opportune time for the redemption is Shabbos. Now, what does this have to do with us? Again, there's always a lesson we should take for ourselves. So, in addition to the fact that we should anticipate and await the coming of Mashiach even on Shabbos, but there's also the connection between Shabbos and the redemption. Shabbos is a day not just of rest, but Shabbos is a day, it says, when the Jewish people were in exile in Egypt. So Moshe Rabbeinu, he asked Pari, the Jewish people should be able to rest on Shabbos, and the Jewish people would come, and what would they do on the day of rest? They would read, this Medrash says, it says that they had like scrolls, they were promised, they knew they had a tradition, they'll be redeemed. And this is what they would read about to, give them the stamina, the strength to go through another hard week of back-breaking labor in Egypt. And similarly, the day of Shabbos is a day which is known as a taste of the future. It's, and besides the fact that it's a day of rest, we're able to, take a step back and to, so to say, enjoy the things we couldn't have enjoyed during the week, spend time with family and friends, whatever it is. But it's also a day, as we say, Shabbos Hashem, to dedicate to the Eibishter, dedicate to Hashem. But it's also a day when we have the ability more to focus on the future, to think about Mashiach. And just, that's really what the message of Shabbos is. What's the message of Shabbos? It's a day when you don't do physical work. It's a day when you pray more, you learn more, you focus more, you celebrate more your Judaism. And that's really what Mashiach will be all about. So on the day of Shabbos is a day when we're taken out of the hustle and bustle of life. It's a day to really think about that during the week, what is my goal during the week is to reach is to reach the day of Shabbos. I'm going to go back for another week and hustle and bustle and everything. But if we internalize the message of Judaism and the goal of the Torah and mitzvahs, which is to make the world a dwelling place for Hashem, a time, a day, a place of a Mashiach world. So then that which is inherently what Shabbos is leading us to. So if we focus on it from that way, not just to take a day off and have a meal and, and socialize and get back to the week, but take that day and to focus on past, present, future, understand, learn more about my connection to Hashem, learn about more when I'm going back to the world. What is the purpose of the 6 days of the week? The purpose of the 6 days of the week is for the day of Shabbos, to elevate everything I'm doing to reach a state of rest, of connection to Hashem, which will be mostly felt in the time of redemption. So Shabbos is a day of anticipation and preparation in our day-to-day life for the future, for the, hopefully Mashiach will come right away. But even if I'm going back to work the next week, and we're still in exile, God forbid, but I could prepare for that future as well. Within that future, within my work, if I have the vision, if I'm conscious, aware of what the purpose of life is, of what the purpose of creation is, which is to reach a Mashiach state. So then even when I'm involved in the work, if I'm involved in the world, I'll have a completely different appreciation and focus of what I'm doing. Hashem should help, we should merit to have the coming of Mashiach and the ultimate Yom Shekolei Shabbos, a day which is completely rest and peace for eternity with the coming of Mashiach now. Amen.